The real
Yeah,
question is, was Tyson stuck behind the train? That may have made him late.
maybe it could have been. I was stuck behind the train. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Today we got a new guest, Jeremy Comazzetto. I hope I said that right. Jeremy, really happy to have you on here, dude. You and your friend Chris, also known as Slim and Gritty, own and blog and talk pro pickleball on No Man's Land Pickleball, commonly known as NML. So I remember following you from the very beginning when you guys were anonymous. You guys had the best takes then on the pro pickleball scene, and I still think you have the best takes now, especially outside of the pro pickleball world. There's a few pro pickleballers who commentate on some of the happenings on the pro scene, but no one's really even close to gameplay analysis, player analysis, and just the pro scene in general than you and Chris. And so, really happy to have you on here, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Should be fun today. Thanks a lot.
But yeah, dude, I want to kind of talk about your story a little bit, about how you and Chris got to where you are today. And then we'll dive into some takeaways from TOC this last weekend. And we have some just general, just pro pickleball questions we want to ask you that not too many people can answer other than you and Chris. And so, give us, for those listening who don't know who NML is, kind of give us your elevator pitch on, who you are and what you do.
Basically, we're an opinion blog, I would say. We've recently also started a podcast as well, but that's in its infancy stage. We're 4 episodes in, but we're primarily an opinion blog that covers pro pickleball. So we basically cover all the pro tournaments every week. We like to do a fantasy draft to preview it, where we draft some players and then kind of talk about why we think those players will do well, and then we like to do some takeaways from each pro tournament. And then along with that, we like to cover other things that come up in the pro pickleball world as they arise. And eventually we're going to be updating our player rankings. We keep saying we're going to do that, and they are coming, but who knows when. But yeah, that's basically what we are. And how we kind of got started was there was just nothing in that space, really. Like,
I mean, how long ago was this? I want to say it's been a couple of years, but
yeah, we're basically just over 2 years, I guess. We started at the U.S. Open in 2021, so we're just over.
And you've been so consistent since then. Like, every tournament, there's always takeaways. Like, you could probably count on your hand how many tournaments you've missed. I mean, have you even missed a tournament?
We've probably missed 1 or 2. There's been a couple where we were had other stuff going on, where we kind of did abbreviated takeaways or previews, but we honestly haven't missed basically anything. The next couple weeks are actually going to be a challenge. The reason it's just me today is that Chris and the producer of our podcast, his girlfriend Alyssa, are heading out on a European vacation. And to be honest, Chris is the real workhorse when it comes to blogging. He's definitely the better writer than me and does all of the editing and things, which we know there's still typos, but
we got AI now. Are you guys using AI yet?
No, not yet. As I think I was talking
It'll change your life.
Okay, I think as we were talking offline, I am not tech savvy, so going to need somebody to help me with that as well. But yeah, no. So it might. We're still going to have previews and takeaways the next couple weeks. But if they're a little shorter than you're used to, it's because Chris, the workhorse of the blog, is gone. But yeah, we haven't actually missed much. And honestly, we just do it because we enjoy it. It was basically, we were already doing our fantasy drafts before the blog started, and we were having these conversations anyways on kind of what become our takeaways. So, and we were just surprised that at that time there was nothing out there kind of in that field. So we just started doing it, and we're still having fun doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm not sure how I originally came across you guys, but I've been reading your takeaways ever since then. You guys are my go-to resource for that information, and there still really isn't any other opinion blog that has even really been attempted or rivals what you guys do. And so it's phenomenal. Anybody listening who's not following NML, go follow their Twitter, look at their podcasts, sign up for their newsletter. It's really fantastic stuff. Just insights you don't get in any other places. But one thing I want to touch on in your story that I think is really fascinating is when you and Chris started, you were anonymous. No one knew who you were. So what was why did you decide to do it that way? I'm assuming it's something related to you wanted to be just straightforward and blunt without, or maybe it was to, I don't know, maybe they felt like you had credibility, but I want to hear why you went anonymous, and then when you decided to not be that way anymore.
Yeah, to be honest, I think Chris and I had slightly different reasons for being anonymous, but like we actually didn't think it was that big of a deal. There's always been sports blogs and things out there that most people write under pseudonyms and
Sure.
things. So like, and I think, you know, you are giving opinions and stuff and you see these people at tournaments and stuff. So maybe at the start you didn't want to really, you know, put your name, and we didn't really know what it was going to become, but it actually probably worked more to our advantage because it created kind of a mystery around us
Yeah.
in the early days, and people wanted to know who we were, and some
Like people
people
were
and
speculating like Ben Johns, Zane Navratil. Like
yeah,
at the time,
people
the
were.
freestyle boys were doing their thing, and they thought that they were you guys. It was really funny.
Yeah, so it actually kind of gave the blog a lot of notoriety at the start, which wasn't at all the intentions of being like anonymous. So it kind of worked to our advantage, but that wasn't the purpose of it. And we always had said that we'd only write what we would actually like put our names behind, like so that, you know, we wouldn't be hiding behind the anonymity and, you know, just taking kind of cheap shots. So we knew kind of at some point that we needed to come out because that wasn't the kind of intent. And then some people figured it out. We're not still entirely sure, but if you're more technologically savvy, I think there was some hint left in the digital footprint, so to say. So we had some people messaging us and things. And so then when we were going to Punta Gorda for a APP tournament, we agreed to go on kind of Lauren McGaughlin's podcast at the time, Pickleball After Dark, and introduce ourselves, I guess, as Jeremy and Chris. So that's how it kind of came to an end. But yeah, it became a whole thing about who we are, which we weren't expecting at the time.
Yeah, that
And
was
like
fun.
for those who don't know too, like I came about you because I started playing the sport a little over a year ago. So
Okay.
definitely after the 2021 mark when you started. But for those who don't know, like you've gotten some either good or bad like pushback from the pros, right? Like there's some people who've name dropped you guys as saying certain things. Like Tyson put it on his podcast. Like, what are some funny hot takes you guys had that you got called out for?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some specific examples. Definitely, we run hot and cold with the pros. It's usually depending whether they like our takes or not, which I think is human nature. If we say some things about them that they like, they tend to, they, you know, maybe like us or say those guys aren't so bad. And then when we say something they don't like, they're not fans, which is all fair and it's all good. Obviously, the most infamous case was when Travis Redenmeyer didn't think we gave him enough credit for an MLP win and challenged us to $100,000 match, which obviously didn't happen. And he's taken account. And actually, Travis, at least for now, has come around with us. And on his most recent episode of his own podcast, Tennis Sucks, actually had some nice things to say about us. But that was probably the most like glaring example of that. But yeah, obviously Tyson hasn't been a fan of us this year. He doesn't think we give him enough kind of credit. So fair enough. But
then like Jimmy Miller from King, so you got Travis who's come around, Tyson every now and then drops you guys like, keep my name out of your mouth, NML. And then Jimmy Miller came after you guys this week for I don't know, what was the beef? He got mad because you took credit for something.
so we on our podcast we talked about Annalise paddle and basically how Annalise paddle tech paddle sounds nothing like a paddle tech. And then that went kind of got not super viral, but all of the famous ODOTs and things were
Twitter.
sharing me saying that. And then a few days after that, Jimmy came out and had the same take. So I kind of said, hey, maybe give a little credit. Like he was kind of saying it like he was the first guy to say that he was the first person saying that about Annalise paddle, which he didn't like. But I guess to Jimmy's defense is he had recorded a podcast with Lucy that came out after this podcast where he had also talked about Annalise paddle, which I wasn't aware of at the time when I said that. But yeah, he didn't take that. But Jimmy's definitely been supplying more takes than a lot of people have in this space before. So,
but Braden and I are in marketing, so tell us, like, this type of publicity, whether or not it's negative or not, has this really helped fuel some page views and listens?
Definitely. You can always tell when obviously, whenever people are talking about you, it gets a lot more traction. Like whether it's good or bad, you get upticks and things. I know the Freestyle Boys, as an early example, when they first talked about us, you could literally see kind of hops in your
Traffic
page views at that time, which is going back a couple years ago now. But
that's too funny.
So I do think you guys are the first to talk about a lot of different topics. I think you guys were the first to bring up a lot of the paddle controversies that have happened this year around Pro XR and Tyson McGuffin's paddle. Like, have you built like some sort of network of informants? Like, where do you have different sources like that you pull from, or do people just message you about things?
yeah, most of what we get is people kind of unsolicited come to us, and then we never just run with something from like one kind of source. Like, you get like we always check it, and we have a few people that have been pretty reliable for us. So generally, if we're going to write about something, it doesn't often come from those people, but we run it by them and say, have you heard this? So we don't run things off kind of one unsolicited, DM or whatever. But our stuff comes from a pretty wide range at this point of, if you want to call them informants. But I think a lot of people just like to gossip and talk about things. So because we're one of the few people still kind of doing that, they like to slide into our DMs and say, hey, have you guys heard about this or that? And then if it's interesting, we'll usually go to some other people and say, hey, what have you heard about this?
And that's a job in and of itself right there, just fact checking everything. I imagine you get a bunch of random messages.
You know what? They come in spurts, and yeah, usually somebody has a motive when they're the first ones coming in there. There's a reason they want it out, so you got to be a little careful. But again, I'll be doing that the next couple of weeks. It's usually Chris doing a lot of that groundwork, so he doesn't seem to mind it. But
well, good luck.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a good groundwork from what you guys do, what you've done. Some really fun stories there. So I have a couple of questions I want to ask you, and then we'll dive into some TOC takeaways from this last weekend, because there's some interesting storylines there. So my first question, this one was just from me, not really sourced from anywhere, but like I feel like you guys have a beat on player abilities and skills, and how different matchups fit together better than the majority of the world. Were you involved in MLP drafting at all? Like people come to you for advice, or I don't know, do you guys GM or anything?
No, not GM or anything. Like, other than we do get a few people that are involved in that world, just kind of they might slide in or send us a message just saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" or "Have you heard anything about this player?" That's kind of the extent of our involvement in that realm.
I'm surprised someone didn't try and snag you guys to be more involved there.
I think maybe, the hot takes work, and I don't even think we're that hot takey, but the opinion work for and against you. I think maybe, people might not want us too involved. I think Jimmy's already come under some fire in his assistant GM role for perhaps being too opinionated. So it's tough
Oh,
to
interesting. I
have
haven't heard about that.
opinions and also.
Yeah, he really wanted to be on the broadcast this weekend, and he mentioned his podcast, or Tyler did. It was just that I think he had talked to Connor. I think they're about to have Connor on their podcast, by the way. Connor Pardo, who's he was the originator of PPA. I think he sold a bunch of it. He's something.
Yeah.
He's still involved.
He's the commissioner, and I think he might, I don't know, but it might own a bit, but yeah.
Yeah. And so I think Jimmy wanted to get on the broadcast this weekend because Utah is kind of his backyard. And I don't think they let him because he's a bit of a loudmouth of sorts. But
yeah,
I love him, but he says whatever he wants to say.
For sure.
But one of the things I want to know, maybe this is too businessy, but this is kind of my brain. I was curious. I understand you have the blog. You kind of want to write what you want to write. If Jimmy mentioned on the podcast that some of these GMs are making six figures, would it interest you if someone said to you, like, hey, leave the blog out of it. I want you know the players better than I do. Come be a general manager for my team. Would you jump on it if they asked?
To be honest, I have another career. I think I probably couldn't. I think maybe, if people are looking for a GM, Chris also has a career, good job, would have to be a good offer, but he might be available for the right price. So if anybody is looking for one, you might be able to get Chris and me as an assistant GM or something. I would have a hard time. I've got a career in kind of wealth management, a practice. I wouldn't want to give that up. So a full-time thing in that probably wouldn't be for me. But yeah, Chris is maybe available. So
well, there you go. Chris is available.
Yeah.
So the other question I wanted to bring up before we jump to some TOC takeaways, this is a question I see pop up on forums, just here and there, but no one's able to really articulate it well. So the question is just being like, why is Ben and ALW just so much better than the rest of the field? All the answers I've seen out there just haven't satisfied. I think I don't know what I want to hear, but I want to hear you articulate why you think Ben and Leigh are just so much better.
I think I've got to give credit. I'm not sure if you listened to it or not, but to Tim, I think I had an idea that was in line with this, but he expressed it a lot better. Tim Parks was on It Feels Right and talked about this, and he actually related it to chess and something called the chunking theory. But basically, it comes down to, because what the issue is Ben and Annalee were the best players, and they have been for close to 2 years. Ben probably longer than that. Annalee around 2 years. And it seems like there's new talent coming into the game. We're seeing better athletes than we've ever seen before. We're seeing more full-time pickleball players than we've ever seen before. It seems like, and I kind of had thought that the gap would be closing. But this year, Ben and Annalee have been more dominant than they have at any other point in both of those careers. And that was not what I thought would happen. I didn't think they'd suddenly just, be passed by a whole bunch of players, but I thought we'd see them start to, lose their kind of huge advantage. But if anything, it's and it is widening. And I think a lot of that comes down to they are getting more reps at the highest level in the biggest spots because they keep winning. So their ability in those matches to basically see the court better, to handle the pressure, is just better than every other player. I think it's really hard to replace game reps. And something that's interesting with pickleball is basically high level competitive pickleball is so new. We're only a few years into it. I know there's been pro pickleball for longer, but I'm pretty sure even Ben would say what he played in, say, 2016 versus now is quite different. So you don't have athletes that have grown up playing pickleball and already have at the different levels those high end repetitions. They haven't played junior tournament. They haven't gone to world of the junior. They haven't maybe battled through the amateur circuit and gotten those high level competitive reps. So right now, I think Ben and Anna Leigh, by playing every single basically championship Sunday and having extended runs every week, are gaining a huge competitive advantage over the rest of the field. And that's basically the only theory I have that I can really explain it. They're good athletes, they have great shot making, but I can't figure out actually why else that gap is widening so much over the rest of the competition. But if you look at the number of repetitions they're getting in finals and semifinals and even quarterfinals compared to basically all the other players on tour, it's a huge advantage. Only Riley really has been making that number of finals. So I think it is just a huge advantage right now in kind of getting gameplay reps at the highest level. And I think even if you're out there in rec or whatever, it's not the same playing those players as it is in a tournament where it matters and every
Right.
point matters.
So from a skills perspective, you feel like there are comparable players who have the same shot making ability and decision making as maybe potentially as good as them, but just because of the difference in experience and reps at the highest level, they just can't
Yeah, I think
do the same thing.
you look at Ben, and he probably is the best decision maker in the game. There's players that are starting to come close on the shot making. I think the other thing that they both of those players are definitely working on their games. If you look at Ben, he's always adding things. Like last year, he got exposed for a while with that backhand and the ability to attack it. He's added a two-hand counter. If you look at his backhand drive, he's really worked on his two-hand backhand drive, which in singles is a lot, which is where I kind of thought that Ben would first be getting really past, was in singles, just with the tennis talent coming in. But he's managed to again find ways to kind of keep himself as by far the best singles player as well. But yeah, like Ben may be, but if you look at going into this year, I would have had Ben and Riley as very similar, actually, in doubles players. I thought that there wasn't a huge gap between them, but now I think that there's a much better argument that maybe JW is catching or passing Ben in, or not Ben, Riley in doubles, than there is any conversation about Riley and Ben. And I just haven't, you look at Riley's game, he's added maybe a little bit that he can do on his forehand off the bounce. But again, on Sunday at TOC, we saw you can still pretty safely dink to Riley's forehand. There just hasn't been the same progression in his game. He kind of relies a lot on athleticism. And as there becomes more athletes and some of the better athletes have picked up more experience, I think we're seeing the field close in on Riley, where we're seeing Ben continue to improve. And a small part of that is, as I said, he's adding shots and things, but I think he was already the best decision maker in pickleball, and it's only improving in the most important moments. And something you also see with Ben is when vulnerability gets exposed, he seems to go back, figure it out, and he's able to improve faster than his competition. Leigh, I think there's a decision making. There's also kind of probably a confidence. She's barely lost. Like you look at her record this year, and I don't think we need to talk about it, but obviously when she does lose, she's not used to it. When we saw the Tyra Black, but I think there's also when you win that much, you just have the belief you're going to win, and that's a huge advantage as well. I think there used to be a huge athleticism gap between Leigh and a lot of the other women. I think as we see like Tyra Blacks and things come into the game, that advantage is shrinking, but then they still have a long ways to go in catching up to her decision making, because she's now however many years into her pickleball career.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I've never heard it brought up that way, and it makes a lot of sense, especially their ability to adapt, change, and improve based on how they experience new players and whatnot. But like speaking of Tyra, like I would love to hear your thoughts on some up and comers you're excited about. I feel like she's kind of really improved a lot in the last month or two. Connor Garnett is another one that comes to mind. But who are some players you're big on right now?
Yeah, those are a couple. Actually, Tyra is actually, I thought she was extremely kind of athletic coming into the game. I thought just for whatever reason, the tennis strokes didn't translate as well for her as a lot of other players. So I actually thought it might be a longer progression kind of for Tyra than other players, but she seems to be working really hard, and her game is improving. And I think when you have her movement along with her hand speed and power, that it's only kind of a matter of time till she's in the very upper echelon. And obviously, her results overall the past kind of month have indicated that she's close to arriving. Connor Garnett is another one. He was the guy that in the MLP draft this season I kind of liked as a breakout player that can, I think, get it done in doubles and obviously singles. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about his paddle, and I think that paddle does get a lot of spin, but I don't think it's just the paddle with Connor. I think he's got, again, the athleticism and shot making to get that done. Another player that had a big weekend that I think is really on the rise is Tina Pisnik. She and Pat Smith obviously had their run to the mixed finals, which unfortunately they weren't able to play. But her tennis background is, she's a little older, early 40s, but she was, I think, topped out at 29 in the world.
Yeah, very
So
elite.
there's very elite. There's not another female kind of in the game that had the tennis pedigree close to that. And she seems to be very serious and working hard on her pickleball game. So it'll be really interesting to see where she ends up by the end of the year. She's somebody that I think could really break through, and I'd almost be surprised if they didn't.
Yeah, age is an interesting thing in pickleball, where especially at this stage of the game, where it may not matter as much as some other sports. If you can, if you can hang. I mean, you got like Matt Wright as an example. Tina. I think like Susanna Barr is another one that still competes, does well.
For sure. I think in time, as the game just keeps increasing in athleticism, you're going to find that it's tough for people in their 40s
Sure.
and things to compete. But right now in the doubles game, I think if you have, elite hands still and your work, it's very apparent that age isn't the biggest factor. And yeah, somebody like Tina, who probably had some athleticism almost to spare, I don't think it really limits her ceiling too much in the short term, at least.
Okay, I'll be. I haven't really seen her play much. I'll have to go look at some games.
It's pretty impressive. She hasn't been playing that long, and she's already, like, her resets and stuff are great. And then her power, I think, really kind of pops. She's got a lot more power than a lot of the other women out there, which is an obvious advantage.
And she was drafted, yeah.
Yeah, she went, I think, 12th to Miami. And yeah, she could be one of the steals of the, even at 12, of that kind of challenger draft
I
if
love how
she
you just
keeps
recall that.
Yeah, it's
I'll
pretty amazing.
guarantee you
progressing.
that nobody listening knows who was drafted what order. That's amazing. GM Jeremy, let's go.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I think that yeah, because I think she went 12th and Alex Strong went 13 to Miami. They went back to back there.
So sticking with MLP and Challenger, Logan, you had some comments about Sam Querrey or something he brought up. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I feel bad. I mean, hopefully we do get roasted on this podcast. I would love the marketing here. Publicity is great, but they made a joke that that only pickleball podcasters listen to other pickleball podcasters.
That's
But
probably true.
it's probably true, yeah. But he also mentioned that he felt like last year he was 8th best men's player in the Challenger League.
You're saying Sam Querrey, right?
Yeah, Sam
I
Querrey.
can't remember if you mentioned that or not.
Oh, hopefully I did. Yeah, Sam Querrey's got a podcast too. Go listen. No, but not before ours. And he mentioned on his podcast, this new It's a Racket podcast, that he felt like he got a little snuffed this year. This turnaround, the season 2 of season 2 and part 2 of season 2, that he was 8th best last year, and felt like he should have been drafted challenger level, and felt like he was better than at least 4 other males drafted in the challenger level. So, I mean, Jeremy wants, I want Jeremy's take. I put together a little list, and just to give some context to the viewers and listeners, when we got into the challenger side of the draft, there were 3 other men on the board that were actually premier level before. So we had DJ Young, Gabriel Tardio, Kyle Yates. They were still on the board going into challenger level. And of course, Sam Querrey was as well. There were 4 players that I picked out of the list that I think have better track records than Sam that weren't drafted at all. Those were Callan Dawson, Steve Deacon, Pat Smith, and Greg Dow. Callan and Greg were both MLP players the season before. I am not sure about Steve or Pat. I don't think so. Jeremy can probably tell me if
Pat
I'm wrong.
was.
Played for the Ranchers, and Steve was on the Ranchers and got dropped after event 1, I think.
Got it. Thank you. And then 4 players that I picked out that were drafted that were kind of surprising to me because I don't know a lot about them. Every name I knew, have not seen them play though.
So these are your 4 picks of people you think that Sam may have been referring to?
Maybe. I want Jeremy's take here, but these are 4 names that I've heard, but I really don't know anything about them. So Marshall Brown, Todd Fott, Jordan Kinney, Martin Emmerich. And the 2 that I know the most about that was Marshall and Martin. But anyway, Jeremy, take it away. Tell me, was Sam Querrey snubbed, or was he fair to be left off the board this time around?
I'm always a little curious with Sam how serious he is about these things and how clickbaity he is. You watch some of his Instagram stories and things, and it's
he just
pretty
it sometimes.
obvious that he's milking it. And I think he's just having fun with the pickleball thing, and he knows often he can get a rise out of it. But he may think that well, one thing that was interesting is, I don't know if you guys ever saw the whole list, but I think 548 men applied or something like that to the Challenger or to the MLP draft. So I think everybody and their dog think they're a Challenger player. It's pretty funny, actually. Like how everybody think they're a Challenger level player.
I think you mentioned in your last podcast, you guys were talking about how a lot of tennis players think they can handle like pro tennisers or can serve just as hard, and it's just not even true. But like if they think that in tennis, like you only can imagine that it's like double that in pickleball.
Yeah, it's got to be double or triple, because part of the beauty of pickleball is that everybody thinks they're good when they play, right? So
yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, so like Sam probably thinks he should be a challenger level player, and I didn't have him in like my top 48 men. Like Chris and I just kind of for fun did our list. But I think if you there, what he had an argument for the last couple spots. There's a garbage list of players that I think you could pay when you get into that third and fourth round of the challenger draft. It's really tough, and it depends what teams are looking for. Of the players you name there, I think the one that stands out is Jordan Kinney. He hasn't played a tournament since last October, and it doesn't look like he's going to play one before the first MLP event. And he's never played anything except men's doubles, I believe, in a tournament. So
is that a homer pick? Why was he picked?
Yeah, who is this guy?
Idea?
He has a super high duper. I think he's like top 25 duper of all men. It may even be higher. He had one good run where he and Tito Landro got, I think it was silver in a small Alabama APP last year, and they narrowly lost to Rafa Hewitt and Julian Arnold in the final. And then Lauren Stratman, lives in Tennessee, tweeted a few weeks before the draft that Jordan was a challenger level player. And I think Julian may have been involved. That was the Mad Drops, I think, selection with their draft. So maybe he had some intel there, but it's tough for me to figure out how a team's justifying taking a guy who isn't playing tournaments and hasn't actually ever played two of the three events in a tournament, when there are all these other players out there getting
so
results.
Potentially he's just like a buddy. He's played some good pickleball around some other pros, and
that's what I wanted to ask. So like some of these teams though were formed because it's not as big as the NBA or the NFL, where when you get drafted, you move your family to the city it's based in. So some of these teams kind of got rounded out based on location and who can play with who in practice. Is Jordan a North Carolina guy like Brooke Beckner is? So could they be playing together in North Carolina?
I don't think so. He's a Tennessee guy, so
Okay.
I don't know what the travel is. But yeah, that was to me the most bizarre pick. And if I'm Sam, that would be the first guy I'm targeting. But I also don't think Sam was in any world a top 8 challenger male last season. He actually, like, you look at they had very limited success, and I actually saw Stefan O'Verne with like a top kind of 4 probably challenger male last year, and that kind of actually saved that team from being close to a disaster. So no, I wouldn't have Sam out there, but I also don't think it's crazy to think that he could be like, your 47th or 48th player. But with that said, like, other than Kinney, like Martin Emmerich, we just saw him pick up a bronze last weekend. He's another high level tennis guy who's on the rise quickly. I definitely think I would have him above him. Marshall Brown is tough to slot in a bit because he's only been playing PPAs. I actually had a faux pas on my podcast and said he hadn't been playing tournaments, but he has been playing all the PPAs. But he and Todd Fout are both a tough evaluation because they're two guys that have only played PPAs this year. And it's really tough to figure out with these challenger level players where exactly they stack up if they're only playing the PPAs, because what tends to happen is they get kind of a win and then they get a loss, and now often they're out. So figuring out where they stack up is difficult, but I think both of those guys actually have better results than Sam this year, so I don't think it's crazy to say that they belong and Sam doesn't. And obviously, Pat Smith didn't even get drafted. He just got picked up by Dallas because Brandon French is out. But you look at if Pat Smith isn't getting drafted, I think Sam Querrey doesn't really have too much of a leg to stand on.
Yeah. And I mean, I think everybody's talking about Callan. I don't know if there's been any announcement of him being a reserve, have they?
Yeah, there's been no announcement of him being a reserve. I'm sure that will be authored. it is interesting. Three of the guys you talk about, Callan, Pat Smith, Steve Deacon, it comes down to a bit what you're looking for, because all of those guys, basically their biggest accomplishments do come in men's doubles as right side specialists. I think probably all three of them have an argument that you could put them in the top 24 if we're only talking about men's doubles. But when we add singles, like Callan and Steve in particular aren't going to be in your top 48, and probably not in your top 100 if we're talking singles players. So it comes down a bit to what teams value. And we saw kind of a real swing away from those right side men specialists overall in this latest draft.
That's a good take. I appreciate that. I watch it so much, but I don't pay attention as much to who's the right side person, who's always the left side person. But I appreciate that context. It's good.
Yeah, MLP is a different format that way, where you have to consider the player holistically rather than just results in a single event. So
Yeah,
and
that could be a reason.
too. Like, you're stuck to, you stick to a side there. We don't do the switching of serves, and we also don't do really stacking that much. People kind of stick to their side.
For sure.
If you're a male, like, you have, I was gonna say, like, but if you're a male, you may play right side in men's, but you're going to play left.
Exactly.
You could get a right side female that's going to do two right sides. But
yeah, and generally, I think you do want a female that can do two right sides, because that's your number two female generally. But yeah, with the men, it makes it interesting. And I think that's why it's actually kind of interesting that Colin Johns still got drafted. Obviously, in Premier, obviously he's a way better singles player, even though he doesn't play singles anymore, than those guys we were talking about. But if you look at Colin's mixed results, and Colin has generally very good mixed partners, and he has no results basically to speak of. He's a right-sided men's specialist basically in the doubles game. So it was interesting that Columbus took him and paired him with J.W. Johnson, because I think it's pretty well known out there that JW wanted Gabe Tardio, who's been going out and getting results recently. And I do wonder if that was a mistake, just because I don't think Colin Johns has the mixed upside at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting take too. I definitely remember hearing that JW, there was rumors going around that he wanted Gabe, but there was maybe some mistakes made at the draft in general. I forgot, was it Brasha, Mary? They got drafted really early, and they thought that might have been a mistake pick.
It was Maggie, Brasha, and it sounds like there may have, like, by Columbus, that maybe they hadn't actually been wanting to lock that pick in or something yet, but
yeah,
it got locked in. So yeah, their draft sounded a little interesting.
I like it. All right, do you want to jump into a little bit of Tournament of Champions? Like, there's some scuffle. There's some talk about the winners there. I mean, is that interesting now?
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we had Parento with the Triple Crown. We had Tyson with the Triple Crown. What are some other takeaways you had, Jeremy, that maybe aren't so obvious?
Obviously the Triple Crowns by Tyson and Catherine kind of are the big ones. I thought that we've already talked about both of these players a little bit, so I won't dwell on it, but that Pat Smith, Tina Pisnik result was super interesting, and just, unfortunately got that concussion, but Pat, he didn't get drafted to Challenger there a month or so ago. And now he had that run with DJ Young where they beat the Johns brothers. And then he goes out with Tina this week.
He's making some statements. Do you think he was mad?
Maybe. I honestly think with Pat, it's a health thing. And he talked about that a bit in one of his interviews. He hasn't been moving well for the last year and a half, and he's just gotten healthy, and I think that's really allowed his game to increase. But it's obvious that that was probably an oversight by teams not to jump on him, because he's been playing some really good pickleball. And Tina, I think, is just a woman that's on the rise right now, and we could see just continue, and she's got that high level pedigree that suggests that she could keep writhing. I think also the other thing is, if we kind of want to look at some maybe disappointing results, is we have Riley Newman continuing to kind of struggle to get the results that he probably wanted. Like, I can't imagine he's happy with his silver
I
there.
mean, AJ was in his head, man. It was rough to watch.
Yeah,
What do you
AJ
mean
was
AJ was in his head?
He was just, you could tell, like, I don't know if Riley puts a lot of pressure on his opponent. It feels like it does from the TV. It feels like Riley's one of those players where you're playing next to him and you don't want to make a mistake because you know he's going to give you the side eye. But like AJ would make some mistakes, he'd make some weird shots, but like he was still grinding the points out. He was getting a lot of digs off of like some good balls, but he just, you could tell his body language. Every time he made a mistake, he would, like, you know, kind of just want to throw his
Every
paddle
time
against the
AJ
wall.
made a mistake,
He
Riley
was, yeah,
was
AJ
doing
was in his
something.
own head, like, I'm making these
Oh,
mistakes. It almost felt like
gotcha.
there was some pressure from the other side. I don't know if you guys felt the same, but that's the way
He
I
makes more
describe
mistakes than others. Like, he's got to be used to it by now.
it. Dig, man.
Yeah, the AJ Kohler experience is always a wild one. I don't know if there's another high level player that you have more kind of valleys and, you know, peaks than AJ Kohler. It's a wild ride, but I think that is a real thing with Riley and his partners. Like, I know some of his partners have said, you know, he never says anything bad, but we see the body language. He doesn't really talk to them, though he was talking to look like to AJ a bit on Sunday, which is actually kind of rare for him. But I think that's why Matt Wright was a great partner for him, because Matt doesn't need to be coddled or anything. He has the self confidence. Matt actually, I think, masked a few of Riley's deficiencies. Something we're seeing with Riley is he doesn't have elite power. And there's a lot of points even on Sunday where he just couldn't finish the ball against Tyson and James. And that's becoming a thing where he can't finish points and he's starting to lose more hand battles than he can. And I think he really misses having Matt Wright's finishing power there on the right to clean up a lot of points for him. And it's
Hmm.
probably something he needs in a partner. And that's not something that AJ really provides. And I'm not even. And then Julian Arnold, also probably not a great mix in that they're just two guys that need to cover a lot of court. But I think the Riley not being a supportive partner is starting to show, you know, with these new partners. It's one thing when you're out there playing with, as I said, Matt, like they were just two guys that could go out, kind of do their own thing, and they figured out how to work on the pickleball court. And he used to play a lot of mixed with, obviously, Lindsay. And again, I think it was easier when he was playing with her because she didn't, they could go each stand in a different corner during timeouts, and that worked for both of them. But I think a lot of partners, that's not going to work for. I know that wouldn't work for me if my partner just wanted to go kind of stand in their own corner during a
Yeah.
timeout. So that is, I think, a problem, and I'm not sure where he's going to turn to, you know, kind of find a better partnership right now in both men's and mixed. I think also another person, if you want to talk about disappointing result this year, is Jessie Irvine. We saw her and Riley have kind of another disappointing day. I think if we were running this tournament in 2022, Riley and Jessie as a mixed team together would have been pretty massive favorites with no Ben and Anna Leigh in the field. Jessie hasn't been getting women or mixed results this year. Another person who never seems to be having fun with any of their partners. And outside of basically her random bronze medal in singles in Beer City, just it's been a disappointing kind of run for Jessie this year. And I just don't think she's moving well. And I kind of wonder where her place in the game is going forward. And the other person I just had a note kind of disappointing is Anna Bright. Her obviously she's gone golds with Anna Leigh this
Yeah, but
year,
outside of that,
but
like, what has she
outside of
done?
that, she just hasn't gotten results, and she's had good partners. Like, you know, Vivian David has won actually with everybody other than Anna Bright this year when she's played with them and things. So
Interesting.
I'm
Yeah,
really
ouch.
having a hard time figuring out what's going on with Anna Bright. Because heading into the year, I did think she was the second best women's doubles player, but the results just aren't there this year. So that was the other kind of notable result for me.
So speaking about Jesse, this was kind of an interesting, thing that happened at TOC. So I was there, and I was talking about this with one of my buddies that watched us. I didn't see this live, but he was telling me the story. So this was Friday night. I mean, it was a windy day the whole weekend, and some games from Thursday got pushed to Friday at some of the mixed games. So
Yeah.
they did some mixed games Friday morning, and then I think they started gender doubles a little bit later. Just a crazy long day. They're still playing at 9 p.m. So I think around 9 is when Riley and Jesse had just finished, or I can't remember who finished, but somebody, I think it was like the last gender doubles game of the day, and they wanted to. There was still one semifinal mixed match left, so it was Jesse and Riley versus Parento and Tyson, and Parento was there, Riley was there, Jesse was there, but Tyson wasn't, and so the stream was just playing commercials, so you couldn't see what was going on. But for those that were there, Jesse and Riley, but Jesse in particular, were like really pushing for a forfeit. Like they just said, Tyson's not here. We deserve the forfeit. Let's just end this and go home. I mean, they're late, but she was, you could tell she was, visually upset about this, really wanted this to just kind of end. And the ref ended up saying, we'll wait till 9:30. If Tyson's not here by 9:30, then we'll forfeit. And so 30 minutes later, Tyson walks onto the court at 9:30, ties his shoes, and they just play. Doesn't warm up, they just play. So Tyson and Parento ended up winning that. It was kind of a fun match, and they split games, and then I think they bageled them. I think Tyson and Parento bageled them in the third, or it was like 11-1 or something.
11-1 maybe? Yeah.
11-1. Anyway, so I looked up the rule.
You call that a pickle?
Yeah. So I looked up the rule, and a referee can impose a game forfeit, so just a single game, if a team fails to report to play 10 minutes after the match is called. And then 15 minutes after the match is called, the ref can forfeit the whole match. So there's kind of this 15-minute typical window, but there's this clause at the end of the rule that says the tournament director may permit a longer delay if circumstances warrant such a decision. So I think Tyson had left the venue. Obviously, this is one of those circumstances that could warrant a longer decision, but 30 minutes is a long time. Do you think that was the right call to give him that much time to show up, or was Jesse right in trying to push for the forfeit?
I think the problem remains that there's clearly with the PPA different rules for different players. It's not surprising at all that Tyson was afforded that time. And on a day like that, I think where, you've got days running together and things, it's understandable that there could be confusion and a player runs late. I think where the PPA and where fans and a lot of players have frustration is that there's clearly different rules for different players. If it was Tyson and Catherine playing, who knows, but whatever team went on a run that day and was surprisingly in the semifinals. Maybe it was Pat Smith and Tina Pisnick, and let's say Pat Smith is a half hour late. I think we probably and Tyson and Catherine are calling for that match to be forfeited. I think we can probably pretty clearly be sure that that match probably isn't played. And that, I think, is where the PPA needs to kind of have on rule stuff a standard that applies to all players. last year. I can't remember which event, but there's actually something similar where apparently Ben forgot or got confused on when the
Oh,
singles
I remember
final
that.
was
That
starting.
might have been TOC.
I think it was TOC
That's
as
funny.
well. And so Dylan Fraser was like having to stand around, and then Dylan actually ended up getting no warm up time either because they just rushed them out, and he'd warmed up previously and said they'd play, and then they kind of I think the PPA on that one might have said that it was their mistake, but Ben had actually apologized to Dylan and said it was his mistake. So I think there just has to be a
So
rule.
wait, the PPA took the fall for Ben on that one?
I believe so. I shouldn't. This is a while ago, and I haven't. I need to go back and read what we wrote at the time. But I think the PPA kind of did say it was their fault or that there'd been a schedule change. But Ben had actually apologized to Dylan and said it was
Oh, that's
his
comical.
mistake. So I think that's the issue. Is there's just not a one set of rule for all players, and from a fairness perspective, there has to be like on all of these things, and it's not just like start times. But
Is this an issue with the PPA, or is this like sports at large? Like if you look at other sports, like
we can
are
always
there
talk.
favorites there?
We can always talk about their being favorites, and we can talk about our star players, say in basketball, officiated differently, and do star players get more consideration? Yes, I think the issue that there rises currently in pickleball is are different actually rule standards being applied based on the players, and I think we can talk about the paddles being a specific
Oh,
example
I knew
of
you were going to
yeah.
bring
this,
that up,
but
Jeremy. Tyson's going to
like
come after us.
probably, but that is where I think there's more of an issue. Like it's a clear, there's kind of first class players and second class. And at times I think the first class players are being given a clear advantage over the other players, which I think just leads to a lack of a fair playing field. And it going to be an issue if they do ever figure out the gambling thing, because gamblers are going to lose their mind if rules
I never
start
even
getting
considered that.
applied differently to different players. And maybe that's what they need to get the accountability, but they probably want to get that figured out before the gambling comes in.
Yeah, there's definitely been moments where the PPA didn't even hide, their favorites and things like that. When you look at some of the things that happened this year, but yeah, that's fascinating with the gambling point. That's gonna ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, if I tell you that basically, like, it's a forfeit if you have an illegal paddle for simplicity, and a player's paddle fails the test, and then I tell you that they actually still won the match because we're going to now say that the paddle wasn't challenged, even though we know it was challenged, gamblers aren't going to be like, cool, I lost my bet. No
Ryan
worries.
Sherry
Like,
is going to be very upset. Okay.
yeah. So I think they better figure that out before. And maybe that is what will bring the accountability. Because right now, the issue is there's kind of no accountability. They want to keep their star players happy, and there aren't really negative ramifications for them doing that.
So last thing I want to bring up before we end today, Jeremy, is just the future of TOC. So you pointed out in one of your articles that registrations like dropped in half for TOC. Being there, I was watching a match between Julian and Alshon. This was like a fringe match playing singles, and some, Julian was complaining about the courts, and he's like complaining about the quality of them. He's like, you got to tell me the conditions of the courts before I fly out to Utah. And anyways, there just stuff like that. Like people I've heard, complain about, the location just not being much to do outside of the court. So do you think TOC is moved somewhere, eliminated? What do you think the future of that event is?
Yeah, registrations were down, and you were there, so you'd be better to comment on it. Crowds didn't look nearly as big on a lot of the streams as what
Yeah,
I've
it
seen.
wasn't until gender doubles that the crowds showed up.
Yeah,
Mixed
on
and
most of
singles,
the
they weren't there.
other tournaments, and Connor tweeted at some point during the tournament, and
Oh, is this
then
the one he like deleted or something?
deleted about like where would you like to see our Utah event, and then he tweeted now saying that they're going to be having an event in January at the Salt Palace, I guess, in Salt Lake City. My guess is that they are going to be like probably ending TOC, just a guess, but I think they bought it because it was considered one of the majors at the time. But probably due to a variety of factors, it hasn't kind of maintained its luster. And just reading the tea leaves, it seems like that the PPA isn't overly interested in keeping the TOC going. I think you can also read from which players weren't there this weekend that they aren't prioritizing the
Yeah.
TOC. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's like, I guess there's also Red Rock, but if maybe there's Red Rock and then this other tournament in January and we see TOC unfortunately kind of fall by the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah. Brigham City is a location for a ton of tournaments. And I think I think Brigham City, like the city itself, was kind of ahead of the game on building a bigger,
For sure.
park with courts. And it's a different story now. Like there's lots of locations, there's lots of places that you can do stuff. But I imagine the deal they have with TOC has something to do with the city. And so they probably wouldn't be able to just take the name and move it to Salt Lake unless they paid more money or something. But I don't know. It seems bleak for that event. But I had a lot of fun playing it. A lot of really good players in my pools. Got my butt whipped several times. So it was a good amateur event. But yeah, the PPAs were fun. I don't know how many you've attended. I really enjoy going to them. It's some people complain, oh, there's 2 hours between matches. Yeah, it's longer, but I just watch pro matches and I'm just fanboying and having fun.
Yeah, I think you have to know what you're signing up for, and if you're just there probably for the amateur experience and you don't care about watching pro pickleball, it's probably not the best experience, but that's not what they're offering.
Right. Well, Jeremy, thanks for hopping on. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. Again, for those listening, go follow NML. They got some of the best opinion analysis on the pro side of things, and really enjoyed it.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks,
All
Jeremy.
right, take care.
Take care.